rural this year in Keene, New Hampshire. Our second session today is going to be about bringing communities together for sort of collective visioning and developing ways of more practically working with people. And we have two folks who I've worked with in the past, vast experience, and I think will be great facilitators of this little exercise that we're going to do this afternoon. Jessica Healy is a real estate developer with 30 years of experience managing the design, engineering, and construction of a wide range of building types for major financial institutions, government agencies, cultural institutions, and not-for-profits. She's a principal at Seven Willow Collaborative, a real estate advisory services firm whose array of services includes placemaking, cultural activation, strategic planning, community engagement, development, operations, and adaptive reuse. Jessica has an incredible career that would take a really long time to describe at this point. Suffice it to say that she's worked with a wide variety of very large concerns globally and also small community-based concerns. Jessica Lax is a civic sector strategist that leverages human-centered design and interdisciplinary collaboration to create more just and impactful organizations, programs, and policies. Jessica is an innovation fellow with the New Jersey Office of Innovation, where she works to make it easier for businesses to start, operate, grow, and thrive in New Jersey. Prior to joining the Office of Innovation, Jessica worked with dozens of public, private, and nonprofit organizations, including the National Park Service, the New York City Economic Development Corporation, and the Kresge Foundation. I worked with both of Jessica's briefly while they were both working with the Van Allen Institute in New York City. We did a really amazing project for recently arrived peoples in Scandinavia during the height of the immigration crisis in Europe. And we developed a pavilion and a festival for people who were looking for jobs, employment, and opportunities in a new country after fleeing the country that they had been born in. So, without further ado, I will invite Jessica Healy up to introduce our work this afternoon. Thanks very much.
Oh, wow. See, I'm very tiny. Here we go. So the emphasis on today's, hold on, I'm going to set my timer so I don't steal from my friend Jessica's time. So the emphasis today is on the first syllable of the first word on the screen, which is co, right? So it's about working together, like listening to communities, hearing what they're saying and acting on what you learned. And so you might ask yourself why, with that weird introduction of the building types I built and around the world and this and that, why I might be asked to speak with all of you on that today. So I'm going to share with you the outline of what I'm going to speak about. I'm going to introduce myself and hopefully share some new ideas of why I'm perhaps the right person to lead this conversation. I'm going to talk about the very small town I live in, which is in Norfolk, Connecticut. I'm going to go back in time and talk about how different communities, or we perceive different communities to have used the community and the dialogue amongst community members to come up with solutions. Look at more recent examples of that, some good, some bad. Think about ex-urban communities like your own and how you might use some of those tools, and then go back to Norfolk with some of the learnings that hopefully have arisen from the talk. And lastly, switch over to Jessica Lax, who's going to have a very interactive, useful, and far more interesting piece of this presentation. But here we go. So I work for I'm going to skip quickly through some of these slides. I work with a principal and a former colleague at Seven Willow Collaborative, and we're doing projects that highlight some of the things that came up this morning, which is like bringing art, visual and performing arts to city centers to create excitement and to bring, in the end, revenue to as an end result. With COVID, this is a greater and greater focus for cities big and small. Here are some examples of work I've done around the world. The BMW Guggenheim Lab was in New York, Berlin, and Mumbai, and it was not about visual art, but about the dialogue about the challenges that city dwellers face. So the topics changed from city to city, all super interesting, from privacy to access to fresh water to gentrification. But the reason I'm here today is perhaps because I have worked closely with communities, in this case in Kibera, the largest slum in Nairobi, in Kenya, where an unbelievable example of grassroots really listening to end users of city infrastructure, be it a laundry, be it a school, be it a playground, and what works for them, and developing it with and amongst the end user, and with their having an active role at each stage of the project. So now we're in Norfolk. It's a tiny town of 1,600 people. And if you looked at its development in 5 phases, the first phase was before written history with the Kiripi Native American tribe that were there for at least 10,000 years before Europeans came. Phase 2, 1633 to 1800, became a European settlement. The town was incorporated in 1758. The third phase, industrialization, with mills and businesses along the local river. Fourth phase, 1875 to 1930, its heyday, where cultural institutions came. Yale University built a chamber music festival, and eventually a fine art center. And so there's strong cultural legacies, a lot like many of the towns that you all live in. And the 5th phase, which is perhaps the saddest phase, the cultural legacies stayed, yet the surrender to the car has created distinct problems, which we're going to delve into a little bit later. But some images of Norfolk, a formal town green, where the cattle grazed before the first school, the first church were built. The green was made into a park in the late 1880s, where different species of trees were planted, and a picket fence was installed. I'm going to lift this up. But think sort of genteel, Victorian, white, moneyed visitors from New York City and Hartford and Boston. But what happened was, painters, Victorian collections, and so forth. But what happened is that the town green is bifurcated by this road, which is a state highway, from the commercial district, which is called Station Place because there's a railroad station in the back. And this is an old photo, but you can start to see, you can't see that, can you see? No, well, you can see, but the little signs say like, drive left, drive right. So there were cars. In fact, there is a car in this photo on the left. There's also a horse and carriage in the photo. And you start to see the void in the middle of a commercial district, which was, guess what? Filled up with cars. And so this building, which was on the far left of the earlier screen, which is called the Royal Arcanum Building, built in 1904, was one of the first mixed-use buildings in the United States, which is fascinating, right? There was a drugstore, there was a local fire department was in it, there were, I could go on and on about the stoves and the ranges and the refrigerators, but the local newspaper said, Norfolk can boast one of the finest business districts in any town of its size in New England. But what happened after that? You went from here to a sort of forlorn, sad, car-centric center that lacks a soul. So enough about Norfolk for now. I'm going to go back in time. And I don't know who in the room has been to Chaco Canyon. You have. Lucky you. So in the San Juan Basin of northwestern New Mexico and built from approximately 900 to 1130. So no architects, no planners, but in fact strong communities. It's hard to believe today, but this planning was, this is fascinating, was based on both solar and lunar cosmology in 3 separate articulations: their orientations, its internal geometry, and its geographic interrelationships. So this is a trying to explain how those axes are formed, but perhaps more convincing is this photo where you see the sun centered on framed by the architecture of Chaco Canyon itself. Later, Native American teepee circles, or teepee rings as they're referred to, of the Great Plains tribes, exemplifies a community both in its decision-making, but also in its expression, it being a circle. And when we skip forward to later American settlements, North American settlements, I should say, both rural and urban, they tended to be disorderly and incoherent, even in areas of strict geometric survey. In other words, the individual landscape unit was seldom in visual harmony with its neighbor, and the whole overall effect is untidy. Why do you think that might be? You'll recognize some of the themes that are similar today, like in your news feed this morning probably. The acute individualism of the American, like, get out of my way. Vigorous speculation in land and other commodities. How is that any different than today? And a strongly utilitarian attitude toward the land. So what can it produce for me? Wealth, mining, and so forth, as opposed to the treasures above and below it. There are more recent histories of community-led design successes and failures. Many of them are in urban settings, and I won't talk about that today because we're talking about rural. But let's look at and similarly in rural communities and far more recent, there are some examples on the screen of initiatives like the one we're talking about today, which is a community-led design, particularly in Burlington, which is nearby, and so I thought I'd focus on that a little bit. So in 1988, and Rick brought this to my attention, so he really gets credit for it, but it was a bottom approach to city planning and prioritization in the town of Burlington, Vermont, with the goal of setting long-term standards for growth, producing a master plan. That should all sound familiar to you. There was $500 million of planned new development pending, and so this is the part that's going to make you cry. 15 applicants were selected after a citywide request for proposals. They were funded $500 each to study these issues and plan for the future. You call that success, you call it failure, you could call it cheap. I mean, you call it all lots of things, but it was an important initiative in the town of Burlington, Vermont, nearby, and it has been written about quite a bit. So I'm going to go back to Norfolk for a minute and share with you that Norfolk hired a planner, right? So they didn't do a community-led design. They hired a fancy pants planner who is looking at the problems, and the problems will sound similar and familiar to you. Traffic issues, they're looking at parking, they're looking at wayfinding, they're looking at pedestrian and bicycle circulation and the isolation of the cultural infrastructure. But instead of trying to work with the community and do an active and bottoms-up planning initiative, they're instead doing what is typically done, which is hiring an expert, mandating, and, expecting people to follow. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Lax, who's going to share with you both the tools, methods, and rationale for using a different approach, which is a community-led design.
All right. Hi, I'm the other Jessica. Nice to see everybody today. We're going to do a workshop-y style conversation for the next hour. But I just wanted to get started understanding who's in the room. So if you work for a local government or a county government or a regional government, could you raise your hand? Okay, great. If you are someone who works at a nonprofit, could you raise your hand? Okay. And how about folks who are from the private sector? And that could be a large range of things. Awesome. And what about the folks in the corner? Awesome. Okay, so some students. Excellent. So we have a great mix. I'm going to just start by asking, what does co-design mean to you? Or you're here, you decided to come to a talk specifically about co-design. What does it mean? Yeah. Collaboration, totally. What other thoughts come to mind? Yeah. Investing in local expertise, yes. Anything else come to mind for folks? Yeah.
So, experiences people that you're designing with your like first perspective that you may be bringing into that community.
100%. So what she just said is bringing in a mix of the local expertise with your expertise. That was maybe a subject matter expert or someone who was able to bring fresh ideas in. So it's all of those things, and I'm not going to be redundant, but you'll see a slide where I basically say those same things in a minute. So co-design, this is kind of like the general process that people talk about. There's like this discovery phase where you're out and you're listening, and then you're creating designs and prototypes, and then you're delivering a solution, and usually it's a cycle. It goes on and on. It's never done, and the idea is it's iterative. All of those things can be done in a co-way. You can co-discover, co-design, and even co-deliver. And I think our host was talking about, in some ways, how this conference was co-delivered, right? A lot of hands getting in to help make this happen. For the sake of, we have an hour, I'm going to focus on the discovery edition. So just focusing on what does this discover phase look like? And so a lot of it is what I'm going to call user research. And I think a lot of the times when we think about co-design, we think about it in terms of physical space, or we think about it in terms of technology. But it can be used for anything. You can use it for policy. You could even use it for how you want to communicate. So you could co-decide what the communication will be on a project, a policy. I mean, getting very granular, even a press release. So why use human-centered design? And a lot of folks spoke to it. It's not just because we are do-gooders. It's because individuals with personal experience are the experts. And there can be two experts. There can be the lived experience experts and the subject matter experts. And we need to merge those two. And that's kind of the sort of the premise behind co-designing. So for the workshop, what we're going to do, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we plan for research, how to actually do the research, so talking to folks, how we analyze that information, and how we communicate those findings. So that's sort of the little bucket that goes into that discovery phase. And I promise it won't be too boring. I know you hear the word research and you're like, where's the nap room? We're going to make it fun. So I'm going to kind of run us through everything in an imaginary case study. Where we are all in Battletown, Vermont. Can't use any real cities or towns because don't want anyone to feel offended. And you work for the local development corporation. So I know we have folks here from nonprofits and other places. Just put on your sort of government hat. You're a bureaucrat. I am a bureaucrat, so I'm insulting myself right now. And the commissioner just came to you and said, we have $1 million, not a lot of money, but that's how it is sometimes. We're going to relocate the library from where it currently is to another location in town. What are we going to do with the existing library space and the parking lot? And for the most part, the whole town has already agreed on this, and they even signed up yes to a bond to fund that $1 million to make that relocation and repurposing of the site happen. So that's the scenario we're in. And basically the research question, you know, they come to you, they're like, this is your great project, make me famous, make it happen. And basically the research question I would make is, how can we reimagine the existing library and parking lot to serve the community, right? That's kind of like the big picture question. There's lots of little questions within that. So types of research. A lot of folks hear about quantitative data. It's kind of been trendy the last 10 years, I want to say, in the government world. But it really only tells you part of the story. It tells you what's happening, right? 10% of people are going to the library. But why? Why or why not? And that's really what the qualitative research is meant to do. It's meant to give more context to the quantitative information so you can make more informed decisions. Because if you know, for example, only 10% of residents use the library parking lot, you might think, oh, we need to, that's because, you know, they're all biking there. Or you might decide that's because, oh, they're not using the library. Or it might be because, oh, they live somewhere else now and they go to another library. All three of those reasons would result in very different designs. So that's the sort of the rationale behind qualitative with the quantitative. Qualitative research, I'm not going to get too into this, but there's lots of different ways to do research. I think my background's in urban planning. We talk about charrettes a lot, workshops a lot. There's a lot of other things you can do. You can do surveys. You can intercept people, which is basically just meeting them where they are. You want to redesign the library? Why don't you just walk up to someone who just got out of the parking lot? There's lots of different approaches. And honestly, the research and the recruitment could be a good hour-long conversation. So the details, with any plan, you're going to create a timeline. You're going to think about your sample size. Do I need 20 people to respond? Do I need 10? I think sometimes folks think you need to hear as many people as possible, and that's a really overwhelming idea. Or if you're in government, sometimes you just want to show that you talk to a lot of people. But to get good data, you don't always need to have spoken to 100 people. Sometimes a great sample size can just be 10. And so you need to think about the sample size and the target demographics. Who's in your community, and did I get a good, accurate sampling of who those folks are? Recruitment, you need to think about accessibility. So that could be a language accessibility, that could be ADA compliance. Who's on your team? You need to think about your interview questions, a consent form, how you're taking notes, and also think about your stakeholders. There's the community, but there's a lot of other people at the table too. So that's just sort of the background of things. And the last thing I really advocate for is paying your participants, because time is money. People have a lot of other things they could be doing with their time. And not only that, but some folks might need childcare to be able to participate. And so being sort of thoughtful about the context in which we're enabling and giving them access to even participating. Another big thing for me is, especially if you're in government, but anybody in general, how are you creating a safe space? You know, you, just as being the person doing the research, you're in a position of power. So that comes off to the other person. How are you showing them that you think they're the subject matter expert? How are you validating their experience? And how are you prioritizing them in your study? And for me, what that means sometimes is I have a whole agenda. I want to get through 100 questions. This person wants to talk about these 3 things. And sometimes I let them. And sometimes I sort of deprioritize what I wanted to get through in that agenda to make them a human being. Okay, so the exercise we'll be doing shortly relies heavily on this, but one of the big things is asking good questions, asking simple, direct questions. Sometimes what happens, and I have it in the don't section, multiple questions at a time. You might stick 2 questions together and kind of not even realize it. Where did you go yesterday, and where do you want to go tomorrow? That's too many questions, too much for that person to remember. Ask them 1 question at a time. Leave the questions open-ended. Do you like going to the library? Yes? Oh, how helpful was that? You need a little bit more. Why do you like going to the library? Well, and then repeating back what you heard. That goes back to validating folks. Like, did you hear what I said? They could ramble on for 20 minutes, and I mean, that's some of you will get to do that momentarily. But you need to bring people back, and they want to know that you heard what they said. And so always kind of reinforcing and showing that you're an active listener. So we're going to do an exercise where you're going to pair up into twos. And for the folks online, I think we're going to drop a Zoom link shortly, and you can join on there, and we'll pair you into twos there as well. Introduce yourself, but then you're going to pick a role to play, and you'll get to play both roles. Role one is you're the local development person trying to answer this question: what do I do with the old library space and parking lot? That master question that I had before. And the other person's going to pretend to be a community member. You can be a fun community member. You can be the crazy community member that you hate in your town. And that's part of it, right? Is you have to interact with those people. So we're going to pair up. You're going to play one role, the other one's going to play the other, and then we'll swap. And it's going to be very short. You'll have about 5 minutes for both sides. So what you'll do, pair up, introduce yourself. We have paper and pen for the folks here. You can take a minute or two to write down your questions. One of you is going to be the person from the government. The other person is going to be a community member. You're going to ask them questions, and then we're going to swap. Make sense? Okay, cool. So I'm going to start the timer. Different thought. That's like every day, 12 times a day, with my partner, with my coworker, with my dog. It's across the board, right? I just found this random image online, but I thought it was kind of a perfect representation. And I think sometimes when we have interviews, do charrettes, we walk away with whatever we walked away with, and we're like, yeah, duh, now we need to move the library to the other location. And that might not be true. And part of that is like, you have personal biases, what you want to happen, maybe hidden deep down inside, or sometimes you're just trying to confirm what you think is true. I mean, there's lots of scenarios. Sometimes you just need to make the truth happen with whatever the commissioner said for that day. You know, I know that it can be quite complicated, but a lot of your biases do play a role in how you analyze data and how you think about it, and that's why it's important to sort of take a step back and just like actually look at the data. So what do I mean by that? First, you got to organize your notes, right? You can't have it everywhere and say, oh yeah, I looked at it in a really thorough way. What I like to do is, ideally, if you're taking notes, you're taking quotes. You're not taking your interpretations yet, because then you're walking away with your interpretation and the other person's walking away with their interpretation. Get a quote down and slowly organize your quotes just in an Excel file. And from there, start to identify themes, right? So maybe someone was talking about this library and they said, oh, what I would really like here is a park with a lot of shade. And you keep seeing the word shade come up and you're like, oh, I want to, shade is a theme. You know, you identify that as a theme. And where I have new library, imagine you wrote the word shade. And then you just start to read through the quotes and see how many of them said shade. Oh, this person mentioned shade. Oh, this person mentioned shade. And that's what the little X boxes are there. And you just keep doing that. You just keep identifying new themes and keep identifying how often it comes up. And that's kind of like very basic version of like research coding. Coding is a scary word, but it's actually quite simple. You're finding themes, you're tracking how often the themes happen. And then once you're done with that, once you're done creating themes and sort of tracking those themes, you're coming up with an interpretation. So you're not like listening to someone coming up with an interpretation. You're collecting a lot of information, taking a step back, identifying themes in a very systematic way, and then gleaning some interpretations from there. So I made up this interpretation, for example. Families felt like there wasn't enough places to go that was fun for them and their children, and they wanted a place that felt safe and kept them out of the sun. Okay, that's like a consistent thing you heard, you have your themes, you were able to take this away. And you might have many interpretations. This is just one. You might leave with 20. And then each one would end up with some kind of action. So what are you going to do with that information? So now you know families want a safe, shaded place that is useful for themselves and their children. What types of activities might that entail? You don't even know what activities that means. You just know that they want something. Who knows what those things could be? That might be a second research. That might be more interviews, or it could be a survey. But likely, it means you need to do some bigger digging. So now it's your turn. On the pieces of paper, I have quotes. This is actually a real scenario. The quotes are real. And I'm going to ask you to get into groups, roughly like you are. Maybe the two of you could join the table at the end or join this table. And you're going to work as a team. You're a team of researchers. You just got 20 quotes. They're listed on there. What are your themes? And start to mark down how often they happen and start to come up with your sort of interpretation. I'm not going to do a mini debrief because we're going to debrief at the end. But in general, how did people feel about that exercise? Not so scary, right? Coding, scary word, the actual thing, reasonable. Cool. All right, so the last part of the process is communication, right? So you learned a bunch of cool things, you analyzed it, you interpreted, you know what the actions are. Now you need to tell somebody, because if you're just housing that information, it's useless, right? So the very first question is not what, is not how, it's who. Who are you telling? And it's probably a lot of different people. You're probably telling the participants, you're probably telling your boss, you're probably telling the council member or the local elected official. And what you might be saying will be the same, but maybe how you say it might look a little different. So I think that's the first thing to identify, right? And the first thing, in a lot of ways, that's important is what's the format? So for different audiences, you might have different formats, right? We're all immediately going to think, let's draft a memo, let's put a deck together, let's do a presentation. Well, if you're trying to talk to the public, maybe it's a video, or maybe it's an illustration, or maybe it's an ad. Really think about what's the best way to communicate information, and a report is not always the best way to do that. Another thing is when you're communicating, a lot of times we'll say, oh, this is what we learned. And now it's all you and your interpretation, your team's interpretation. But it's really important to bring in the quotes, the actual feedback that you heard, to give it some context and some sort of grounding, right, for simplicity, and explain how you came to the conclusion you came to, right? Don't just say, this is what we found. We did all these amazing things, and I'm going to kind of go over that, which is the what. So when you're presenting, you're kind of bringing people along on your journey. You're telling your story, the research story, and you're going to start with the question. You're going to talk about who's participated, not just how many, but are the demographics reflective of the community you want to be engaging, whether that be within a 1 mile radius for the library, or maybe you know 1 mile radius goes to the library, but you actually went 5 mile radius to come to the library. So did you talk to all those people in that 5 mile radius? What did you hear? So that's where those quotes would go. What did you interpret, and what were your recommendations, those actions? And then that might be, again, there's some things you need to do further research on. I think another thing to keep in mind is often we wait to share feedback until it's all done. You need to do a little bit more research. I'm not going to talk to my stakeholders. I'm going to do the more research, and then I'm going to come back to them when it's in a perfect little bow. I really don't recommend this, because you want to bring everyone on the journey with you, because otherwise they're not going to see how you got from A to D. They're going to have miss B and C. And so it's really important. And beyond that, something I think about a lot is, how do you model behavior? Co-design is kind of new, right? I mean, it's new, it's not new, but a lot of people don't do it. And how are you going to get more people to do co-design is if you show them how to do it. If you show them, oh, this is what I learned, but I didn't get the whole picture yet, I need to go back, then they're going to start to think about that for their projects. So super important. Don't just wait for the bow. Think about it as iterative. Think about it as something that takes time. All right, your turn. So what are you going to do in groups? Stay with your same group. Decide who you're presenting to. I'm not going to decide for you. You pick one person, though, because you don't have time to present to all the folks. And kind of using this model, write out, what did you learn? What was your process? You can make some of it up, obviously. You know, who participated, etc. But I think the main thing that I'm going to be really curious to see is, y'all had the same 20 questions. Did you walk away with the same thing you want to communicate? So that'll be fun for me. Yeah. The research question? The research question, I don't remember it, but how can we reimagine the existing library and parking lot to serve the community? So you'll have about 10-ish minutes to work on this last piece, but I'm going to leave this up for you as reference. That's helpful. We're going to wait for the folks online who are going to join us shortly. They've been on their own Zoom. They're going to come back in. But in the interest of time, I thought we could get started, and maybe one of the groups would be willing to share out first.
Hello. I'm going to do this if that's okay. That's much better. Okay, so just as kind of context before we start the presentation, we decided that our presentation would be targeted at the library, like Board of Trustees, just to give you some context. So the research question that we set out to answer was, how does this community want to see the library and the parking lot reimagined? And we heard from lots of different residents and business owners and just other people who have a lot of stake in what happens in this community. And we really identified a few common themes. So there were a lot of people who were concerned about the farmers market being potentially, moved, or they just weren't sure necessarily what would happen to it in the face of this new development. So definitely hyped about the farmers market. And then the other big themes that we heard were around affordable housing, parking, and having a community gathering space. And really kind of how we interpreted what folks were saying was that there's a lot of passion kind of in either direction around affordable housing and parking in particular. But we did not necessarily identify like what the dominant opinion was. People have a lot of different opinions about that for different reasons. And so after kind of reviewing everything and realizing that people in our community are really passionate about having a community gathering space and maintaining a space for the farmers market, what we're going to recommend is that the current farmers market location will go in the parking lot of the site that we're talking about, where the old library is. And the old library building could be converted into a kind of multi-purpose community use space. And so, as much as we recognize that affordable housing is certainly an issue in this area, building affordable housing on this site is not viable given the budget that we have, and it doesn't benefit the whole community in the same way that a multi-use community space might. And so we want to do further research on how we can best use the community space. We had a few individuals in the community who identified the need for more kind of safe and family-friendly spaces and more recreation spaces in the community. And so that's one potential option, but we'll want to do deeper research into how we might best use that space.
Awesome, thank you. We can give her a round of applause, the whole team. And for the folks that just rejoined online, we're just sharing out on our presentation, so you'll have an opportunity to do that as well. I'm going to ask another group from the in-person. Awesome, thank you.
So we chose our stakeholder to be the mayor. Our mayor is she's progressive and not up for re-election. So what we're going to do for the mayor, because we know she's very busy, is this is going to go out as like kind of a bullet point memo. We spoke and we're going to outline it in terms of each individual issue that we identified through a series of interviews with community members. We think it's a pretty good representative sample. On those issues, we feel like there's enough sentiment in favor of either keeping or remodeling the existing library. And so we recommend kind of revisiting what we can do on that site. We also heard from our community that there is not enough community space, and so we recommend folding that into the library project. On the issue of parking, we feel like there's enough negative sentiment against parking that we think that it should be deprioritized for now. We don't need to build new parking. On the issue of affordable housing, it was a little bit mixed, and we recommend that we engage in a separate study on affordable housing to see where we should actually put that. And then we recommend keeping the existing farmers market and potentially also investing in that space as more of a park or public open space.
Awesome, thank you. I think, well, let's give you guys a round of applause. And I think it's interesting, you can see there were already slight differences in thinking about decreasing parking and parking as an issue, and even in terms of both of you thinking about affordable housing and how to address that issue, right? Oh, it needs to be a separate study, or oh, we're just gonna push that aside, which is both are reasonable. Would the group in the back like to share?
We're going to start, we're going to present to our boss because we have a lot of follow-up information we'd like to gather, and we want to make sure there's a budget for it before moving forward. So our research question was how to reimagine the existing library and parking lot, and we interviewed members of the community and development partners, local public officials, and then also folks that were developers that were both community aligned and also those who were a little bit more opportunistic in nature. And so some of the themes and interpretations that we heard were very similar to other groups: a desire for community space, a desire for true affordable housing versus faux affordable housing, and that there was contention around whether or not housing should go on public space, parking, an opportunity for some sort of private-public mixed-use space, bringing in commerce as part of the development, a need to identify a solution for the farmers market, and then some folks in the community not desiring any sort of change with the library as it existed. And so, as I mentioned, we have a lot of additional questions. So we want to map out a little bit more the politics of the development itself and who the different stakeholder groups are. What are the affordable housing needs and what can the market bear? A parking study for the area, so we have some more information about whether parking is truly needed, or if we can minimize that on the footprint. And then more questions around the current farmers markets and where they are located and their service areas, and whether or not this particular property could support a farmers market.
Awesome, I love that. You guys are thinking, we don't have enough information yet. This is a great intel into things we need to do separate studies on. Affordable housing, parking. I mean, I think what's super interesting is that's the whole thing with doing research, is how it spins off can look like many, many different things. And I think, again, sometimes we immediately walk away and assume everyone walked away with the same interpretation and the same action. And I think just slowing down that little part there is time consuming, but is actually where all the assumptions are made, where all the good and bad can happen. So cool to see how everyone kind of had very similar takeaways. Interpretations were the same, actions were different, which is good. I'm gonna let our last group go, the online folks.
Hi, everybody. Wave your arms if you can hear me there at the podium. All right, great. My name is Kevin Peterson. I'm the Director of Economic Development for the New Hampshire Community Development Finance Authority. And we had a pretty good conversation. We identified 4 themes, and I apologize, I was unable to hear the audio, so I didn't hear the others come through. So the 4 major themes that we heard were sort of, the fundamental one was whether the library should even move. There's a lot of sense that they should keep it in its current location. Themes around housing, the desire for more housing, particularly affordable housing. The concerns about parking, and mostly that we don't need more parking, and also a desire for additional community space for events, for the farmers market, something that's adaptable, something that's safe, accessible. So among those four, those were the four major themes. But the overriding one was, hey, wait a minute, why are we even moving the library? So that was the fundamental question. We also wondered who the presenter would be and what role that person is playing. Is this the person who's analyzing the data an activist who is trying to make a point to the decision makers? Is it an independent consultant who's been asked to provide an unbiased representation of what the community input was? Is it a representative of the decision-making body, which might actually have an agenda and try to sway the information? So we also felt that whoever the presenter was, we'd include visuals and graphics that showed percentages of different themes that were represented by the comments, the numbers, what some of the key concerns were, and then maybe some of the outlier comments that were a little more ad hoc, but that were important for folks to consider. So I'll stop there.
Helps people understand why that decision was made. I think we're at time, but I'm around if anyone has any last questions, and thank you so much for joining and being very, very active participants. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you all very much. Jessica Healy, Jessica Lax. This has been a really great first day, and it's wonderful to meet you all. This is what a great group. I have to say the online crew is pretty amazing too. So collectively between ourselves in this room and out there in the ether, this has been really impressive, and the kind of level of dialogue and discussion that you all have been having is it exceeds my expectations. So congratulations to you all. Thanks for sticking around today, and enjoy this evening. Say hi to one another, and we'll see you out there ourselves. And come back tomorrow morning for Gathering in the Commons. It's going to be a really cool session. So thank you all.